Hello, I'm Dr. Basil Constantine here for the ACU Online Writing Center, and this is our 10-minute-ish guide to annotated bibliography revisions. This is one of several times that we have with the EXSO 491 course. This is the exercise science capstone in which you write both a annotated bibliography, revise it, and then ultimately include it as part of a research proposal. And at each of these steps, you will likely be doing some revision as your ideas evolve, as they concretize, as they become more focused. So it's very common to take the original assignment and go back and revise it in light of what your mature ideas show. So our objectives today are to identify the purpose of an annotated bibliography, again, keeping in mind that this may be evolving as you are writing and rewriting your materials, to discuss how to identify and remove some extraneous elements, and also to explore how to align tense and phrasing with APA style. Some webinars that might be of interest to you if you are new to annotated bibliographies as a genre. So we have a webinar targeted at people who are writing their very first annotated bibliography at the undergraduate level here. We have a webinar here that talks about the difference between annotated bibliography entries and article critiques. One is more summarizing, the other is more giving a strengths and weaknesses kind of analysis, or strengths and weaknesses related to one's purpose. Here's one looking at annotated bibliographies at the graduate level, and another that's about how to align an annotated bibliography and select information based on your particular focus or practice area that you are writing for as the audience. So let's look at some examples of identifying the purpose of an annotated bibliography. This first example is coming from a published article, and we can see that it begins with this very helpful text. And in the actual article, this is at the start of the first major section after the introduction. The current descriptive annotated bibliography presents important selected recent publications dealing with the reported health benefits and risks of fish and seafood consumption described in the scientific literature over the past 24 years. Now, you might be reading that part and saying, but wait, which 24 years? And this is a rather long sentence, but at the very end, they point out 2000 to 2023. And what they mean by scientific literature is also spelled out. They say they looked in Google Scholar, PubMed, Science Direct, Scopus, and FAO databases, looking specifically at a set of types of literature that they examined. And that's coming from this really actually quite interesting article in case you have an interest in fish and seafood consumption. Now, here's another one coming up. And one thing that I always want you to look at is when you use a citation management software, does it capture everything correctly? And that's why we're looking at not the annotation first, we're looking at the citation here. So although our focus here isn't on APA style, I do want to note that here, this part of the article title, that should be formatted in sentence case, not in title case. So make sure you get that. Also, in this case, this is a electronically published article without a page range. And so the software has interpolated this as if it was a page range, like page 1 to 1. And so we want to make sure you take that information out as well. So let's look at the actual annotation here. In 2014, FAO completed a major update and website launch. That's justification. That's not talking what the purpose of the annotation is. We get that in the next sentence. To date, no studies compare the recommendations on fish consumption worldwide. Therefore, the FAO repository, which this is describing, was used to prepare this work. This scoping review of 100 countries aimed to assess the level and type of agreement and differences between existing global guidelines on aquatic food consumption. So it's going country by country, and that is the purpose of these things they're reviewing and annotating. So let's talk about some text that has an unclear purpose, because here we have some great examples of very clear things, but what might it look like if that was unclear? Well, this annotated bibliography explores articles on obesity. This is one of the great problems of our time. It has many particular implications. It cuts across so many, many fields. For your annotated bibliography to be useful, it will be very helpful to be more specific on what aspects of obesity and who is the target audience here. Who is this information aimed at? Or we could uh, approach this with questions like, okay, where, like obesity as a general phenomenon or in a specific place or cultural context? What fields of practice are these implications relevant for or intended to be useful for? And so you might work on improving the clarity of purpose with text like, oh, this annotated bibliography collects recent articles on obesity related to physical training and exercise science. Okay, that is certainly an improvement, more specific, more clear purpose, because we add some boundaries on time and subject. Now, depending on the review you're doing, it will probably also be relevant to give us some other information like, oh, this summarizes key peer-reviewed articles on obesity, because there are lots of other things, including books out there that are not peer-reviewed, and that's one of the problems, because it's not clear how they arrived at the ideas that they're advancing. Summarizes key peer-reviewed articles on obesity published in this period of time related to physical training and exercise science. And so here we get boundaries of time, source type, and subject. So I'd say this is even better here for our purposes, because if you say, read a summary of things from before 2021, you can say, oh, this is telling me what's important that came after that. Now, our next task is to look at how to identify and remove extraneous elements. And here we're going to look at something beginning with the stated purpose, because the stated purpose helps us identify what is relevant and what is not. This annotated bibliography reviews key literature on interventions for obesity in the island nation of Mauritius, with a target audience of physical trainers, dietitians, and physicians. Sounds good so far. And then we have this very dense paragraph. And some of the language is more fluid than it needs to be, but a lot of the summary is keeping in mind that purpose of target audience for physical trainers, dietitians, and physicians, and interventions for obesity in this place. There's a lot of background that we might not need. And so, okay, talking about intricacies of the relationship, that's not necessary here. Uh, Spelling out qualitative research methods, we could just say qualitative interviews and focus groups, and we get that without those three words in the middle. And so as you go, it's always helpful to look at, okay, is this going to change the meaning towards my target audience if I cut this out? Down here, prevalence of obesity within the population, it's not that it's incorrect, but that wording is not actually adding meaning here. And sometimes you'll just see something where, oh, I can take that out without harming the meaning, so just trim it. Now here you can also see they're talking about some aspects of it, which I'm not saying that they're not important, but keep in mind who our target audience was. So we see target audience of physical trainers, dietitians, and physicians. So the general public health aspects here, those are less important here in our annotation, because our annotation is trying to be very concise and deliver only the most important element for our purpose and our target audience. Let's look at another example. This annotated bibliography was compiled to identify culturally specific literature on obesity management in Mauritius for an audience of healthcare workers. Okay, that's pretty clear on who this is aimed at. So let's look at our text. And, it was good to read it out. It's very easy to follow. But the question is, what are the key pieces of information? And by removing the pieces that are not, it becomes a more useful annotation for the people who are in alignment with this particular stated purpose, who are in that audience interested in culturally specific literature on obesity management. And so as we look through that, and the task of removing extraneous elements, see, okay, there's some things that might be said more concisely that are not pertinent here. So, that may be in their starting point, but none of the healthcare workers are going to be dealing with the economic burden directly. That's more a task for the government, for example, the legislators who are making laws, the executive branch that is executing them, and so on and so forth. Now, you may also find things like this wording, a comprehensive methodology that includes that. Yes, it does help a little bit in saying, yes, this is a sentence where it's talking about the methodology. But we get all that once we say the authors utilize cost of illness analysis that quantifies direct and indirect costs. So we can actually cut that out. And now it's more directly telling us, hey, here's the thing that they did. And in this example here, where it says with an extended discussion of health expenditure, uh, that could be very well, but is that something that our audience is interested in? Probably not. Again, appropriate scope and details for the audience in mind. And here, not only, those are rhetorical devices that, if we were reading this out loud, would help call the listener's attention to it, but we just don't need it here. So we can take that out and we get, oh, the findings revealed that this is X. And same thing with this projected increase in healthcare costs. That's more of a government thing. Over the coming decades, if current trends persist, that's out of scope for our audience. So I hope from this, one of the things that you take is that it's not that the information is inaccurate, but that it is not central to the purpose of this annotation and the audience that the annotated bibliography is providing information to. Let's look at the second part from that same source. So we have a lot of detail here, but if we look at it and bolded our insertions to condense things, so calls attention to, yes, that's not inaccurate. We can say that more concisely with one word, emphasizes. And the fact that we're talking about regulation and in general down here is more central to our understanding than specifically being legislative. Now, if we were talking about government policy and it was for practitioners in the legal realm and people running for or in public office, that would be a different sort of details being emphasized, but keep our audience in mind. Now, because we're talking about healthcare workers, hospital level responses, that is actually relevant. So that is a good thing to keep in there. And this how that begins with a eloquent descriptive introduction. Okay, we're not discussing the rhetoric there, we're discussing the key elements of interest to our audience. So that reflection might be of interest when you are reading the article just as a, oh yeah, I can picture this, but it's not needed for our annotation here because those aren't details that would affect what these practitioners would do. And then this example, here's, you can condense 3 words into one, and then here, the key element is to promote a healthier lifestyle. And so all those other things, while it is not incorrect or inaccurate, it's also not necessary for our purpose. And so again, your ideas can be more clear, more concise by removing that level of detail and using the most concise verbiage you can that captures the key ideas. So let's finish up by talking about tense and phrasing with APA style and how it might come up in revising your annotations. So we're going to do this by talking through some common APA errors that you might have in annotated bibliography entries. First one is tense. So in general, APA style refers to things that have been said, done, or published in the past using past tense. So rather than Conn Smith explore, Conn Smith 2021 explored. If it's helpful, you can think of that as a shorthand for Conn Smith writing in 2021 explored blah. And so you don't want to say the study reveals, but instead the study revealed. So you could go back to those examples that we were talking about earlier about removing extraneous elements, and then go back and apply this principle of tense clearly referring to things that have happened versus are currently happening. We also want to be specific. Make sure to identify who the findings are relevant to, both in your annotations and the introduction. So rather than saying the findings of great interest, tell us who, like exercises coaches who are working with this population. You also want to avoid superlatives, saying this is a great interest, this is a terrible problem, things like that. Just the important thing is who they are of interest to, who they are relevant to, and why. And finally, let's talk about conciseness. This comes up a lot in the research methods. You saw an example of this earlier when we were looking at this text here, where we have the discussion of the authors utilize a comprehensive methodology that includes cost of illness analysis, etc. But it's not the comprehensive methodology that's really relevant here. It's that they did that cost of illness analysis of direct and indirect costs. And so when you are writing about this here, look at the first bullet example, this qualitative phenomenological study. Well, phenomenological research is inherently qualitative. So listing the word qualitative doesn't actually give us any more meaning. So you can take that out. There are also some standard abbreviations that you can use in APA style. So rather than such as and like, use E period, G period. Rather than, for example, use I period, E period. And so using things like this will help condense your annotation and also help it read more clearly and focus the reader's view on the idea. Because it's not just all these examples here. Imagine if instead I had written out instead of such as, and I said examples for this include, well, E period, G period, comma, will give us all that with a short bit of text characters rather than 4 words like this. And then all I have to do, without even aligning the font size, put these next to each other, and you can see, oh, one is much more concise versus the other. And so look for ways to really focus the reader's attention on the detail by being concise. So that's our short guide to how to revise your annotated bibliography entries, whether this is going to be for initial assignment or on the revisions. And to review our objectives here, we talked about the purpose of an annotated bibliography, how to identify it in the literature and to clarify in your own writing. We talked about how to remove extraneous elements from the annotations, and we finished by talking about how to align tense and phrasing with APA style. So with that, I'm going to say, do remember we had some examples of relevant webinars. If you are new to annotated bibliographies or want to delve into the topic, you can always send us an email at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu. Go to my.acu.edu and under the groups, select the Online Writing Center to schedule an appointment and visit us online.